and welcome to Innovation Celebration, the show where we celebrate recent advancements in science and technology, the people and ideas that make them possible, and discuss the ways that they aid human flourishing overall. I'm Thomas Walker.
And I'm Angelica Werth, and today we're going to be starting with the Galleri blood test to detect cancer. The full name is Galleri Multi-Cancer Early Detection Test. And basically what the test is you take a blood draw, like a standard blood draw that you'd get at the doctor's office, and then they send it off to the lab, and there they can detect over 50 types of cancer just from that single blood test. And so this is really significant because right now, there's only about 5 different cancers that are being regularly screened for it, like your annual physical, for example.
So how many cancers are there in total, and why do we only screen for 5?
We know of over 100 types of cancer. And as far as I know, the only reason we only screen for those 5 is that we only have 5 new tests for those 5 that we can easily do that are worth doing, cost benefit analysis at like your annual doctor's appointment. So the Galleri test is meant to supplement those regular screenings. You go in for your mammogram or whatever else you'd normally get. And then you also get a blood drawn that can check for these other 45 types of cancer. And of note, particular cancers that this picks up are breast cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, which are 3 of the 5 deadliest types of cancer. And then leukemia and Hodgkin's lymphoma as well. So some pretty significant cancers that this picks up. And this is important because GRAIL's mission is to aid in early cancer detection. The reason for that is that your 5-year cancer survival rate increases by a magnitude of 4 if you can catch the cancer before it spreads. So obviously there's huge life-saving potential there.
Yeah.
So just to explain how the science works, like I said, it uses a blood draw. So we think of our bodies as being like really static and just being the same all the time, but that's not really how it is. Like our cells are constantly dying naturally and being replaced. Never mind if you have an illness or an injury or something, that's going to cause more cells to die. But in the same way that your skin sheds dead skin cells, the rest of your body is doing the same thing. Except when it happens, on an internal level, then your cells release a bit of cell-free DNA or cfDNA into your bloodstream.
And new cells are replacing them.
And newer cells are replacing them if you're reasonably healthy.
Yeah.
For cancer patients, they have the additional fact of a tumor growing in them that is not only causing the cells around them to die at an unnaturally high rate, causing more cell-free DNA to be in their blood, but the tumor is doing the same thing of having some cells die and replacing those cells and releasing the DNA into the bloodstream. And so when that happens, it's called circulating tumor DNA or ctDNA.
So you've got cfDNA and ctDNA.
Mm-hmm. The ctDNA is a small portion of the cfDNA, so it's usually less than 1% of that floating DNA in your blood is coming from the tumor if you have cancer. And so the reason that this is helpful for scientists then is the genetics of the DNA that are sort of redundant, but the DNA that's coming from the tumor is the same DNA that is in the tumor. And so they can identify that there's a mutation in that DNA. And so to explain what that actually looks like briefly, if you remember the structure of DNA is a sugar phosphate backbone, and then you've got your little double helix, and there are a bunch of nucleotides, which are your cytosine, your thymine, your adenine, your guanine, and those are what codes for the actual amino acids. And so you can have a number of types of mutations, but related to cancer, the most common is what's called a point mutation. It means just one of those nucleotides is wrong. You can also, though, sometimes have a rearrangement where they've flipped places, or an amplification where you've got extra ones in there. Occasionally you have a chromosomal, like a whole extra chromosome, but that's not usually associated with cancer. It usually causes other problems. And so that's one of the challenges right there of using this kind of technology and information to detect cancer is you're looking at less than 1% of what's already a percentage of the bloodstream.
A fairly small one, presumably, because most of your bloodstream is your red blood cells and your white platelets and all that.
Exactly, yeah. And then a lot of times it's just that one nucleotide that's off. And so we're talking about really, really precise technology that's able to leverage that in our favor. But the test has done really, really well so far. They've trialed it on over 134,000 people. And the test has 99.5% specificity, which means that if you give 200 people the test, only one of them will have a false positive.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's very, very good. But the test does a little bit more than just tell you, do you have cancer, yes or no? It helps you identify where the cancer is coming from. And it does that with about an 89% accuracy rate. So the idea is the test will tell you if you have cancer or not, and guess where it's coming from. And then you go back to your doctor, and the doctor will do more screening in that area to determine exactly for sure that it's there. And then
so it works hand in hand with traditional screening. It doesn't replace
right, it's not supposed to replace it. It's just supposed to act as a supplement to that. So it hasn't been, at the time of recording, it hasn't been FDA approved yet, but there are huge hurdles in getting something FDA approved, not least of which is the specific trials that the FDA requires, which the average cost for those is $19 million, which is a small fraction of the overall cost to produce a drug, but it's not a small amount either.
Well, this isn't a drug first,
right,
it's just a test, which begs the question of why does it need to go through this approvals process when it's not going to do any harm? You're just taking some blood and analyzing it. The worst that can happen is that,
get a false result.
Which you'll find out through traditional screening. So who's footing the bill for that 19 million?
So Grail is a private company. So it all comes from their investors and the money that the company itself has. And this project has attracted some big name investors, including Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates. So this is another example of what we were talking about last week, of these people who have this fantastic wealth aren't just sitting on it, they're putting it to work.
We're going to end up mentioning Jeff Bezos in every episode.
Not the goal, but we'll see. But yeah, so it's entirely privately funded as far as I can tell. But you raised a really good point with the fact that this isn't a safety issue. This is just a standard blood draw. But the NHS, which is the National Health Service in England, doesn't quite see it that way. So Grail has made a deal with the NHS to start distributing and using this test in the UK. But first, they want to run their own trial of it with 165,000 people. The good news is that's due to start this year. The bad news is, even if the test goes well, they won't make it more widely available until at least 2024.
That's bureaucracy for you.
Isn't it? Yeah. But in the US, I'm assuming this hinges on FDA approval, but Grail has made a deal with Providence, which is a regional healthcare provider on the West Coast. And as soon as they can, they want to start offering it in California, Washington, and Oregon at all their points of care, so all their clinics and hospitals and things. And if it goes well in those 3 states, they'll expand it to their whole 7-state coverage. So,
and then presumably there'll be deals with other providers.
Right. This is just the beginning. This is just what's been already worked out. So a quick word about how they actually found this technology to be useful. There's a company in San Diego. Grail is based in San Francisco, but there's a company in San Diego called Illumina, and they deal with DNA sequencing and biotechnology. And so some of those researchers were working on looking at the genetics of pregnant women's blood to look for chromosomal abnormalities. And what the researchers found is that some of the women didn't have chromosomal abnormalities. They had those smaller mutations that you get with the circulating tumor DNA that we talked about earlier. And they found it in 10 of the women participating in their trial or study. And only one of the women had previously been diagnosed with cancer, but all 10 of the women that they found this abnormality in did in fact have cancer. So they effectively diagnosed 9 more women correctly. So Grail then started the spin-off company, Illumina started the spin-off company Grail to use this technology and go a different direction with it. And I couldn't find the names of any of the researchers involved, which is a shame. I'd like to give them a shout out in particular, but their chief medical officer is Joshua Offman over at Grail. And it's also worth noting there's a similar technology already in use, but it's not as precise. And there are 2 tests that have been approved by the FDA called Guardant 360 CDX and Fountain 1 Liquid CDX. And they're used as what's called liquid biopsies. And so the idea is they've already been approved for patients that know they have cancer, And you can look at that circulating tumor DNA in the blood of a patient you already know has cancer, which will have more of that ctDNA, just to monitor the progress and see how well the treatment is working. And the benefit of that for cancer patients is they already have enough invasive, insane treatments going on. This is much less invasive than a standard biopsy.
Being under a gamma knife and things like
Exactly. It's already a rough time for them.
So,
and I just want to wrap up this section, though, by talking about the life-saving potential of this test. And if it's regularly adopted, they're recommending it for patients 50 and over to get it people 50 and over to get it at their regular annual screening. And if it's adopted, they expect that the 5-year cancer survival rate will increase by 26%, or it would save 26% of the people who have cancer within 5 years. So what that looks like in actual numbers in the US in 2020, we lost 600,000 people to cancer. And so if we could have prevented 26% of those deaths, that's 156,000 lives saved per year just in the US. So that's obviously a huge step forward in the battle against cancer, really.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so that's a really awesome potential we have there. So now over to Tom to talk about the Unreal 5 game engine.
Sure. So I'm going to change gears a bit here and talk about something that might not seem as, critical on the surface, but actually has a number of really interesting applications. So Epic Games has released the first early test version of its Unreal 5 engine. So just to be clear for anyone who doesn't understand video games, a game engine is the core software on which a video game operates. So there's a number of these, so some bigger ones and some smaller ones, but most video games that you go and buy in a shop are based on one of these engines. Unreal is just one among many, but they are the essential code that controls how the game generates its landscape, how the characters and physics interact, or basically all of the fundamentals of how the game operates on a technical level. And then, on top of that, the game designers just add in the specific characters and shapes and storylines and things. So the thing is that recently game engines have started to be used in other applications besides just running video games. So one really exciting recent one is for the Star Wars spin-off series, The Mandalorian, they used a game engine to generate the visual effects for the show. So so the show was filmed on a set called The Volume, which has a screen around the outside, and virtual landscapes were built based on real locations with photography built into them, and then modeled
into the sets, you mean?
Yeah. Like real landscapes, outdoor landscapes.
Oh, I see.
So and then these fictional, they extend them to make alien landscapes. But then those are projected on the screens around. And some of these are indoor, artificial places, some are outdoor, but they're shown on the screens. But it's not just an image, it's this 3D realm they've created with the game engine. And then the physical cameras on the sets are in the engine as well. So it's moving the background according to where the cameras are. So the actor is in the set, the camera's here, and the background is moving correctly as though the actor were physically in that space. So it means that the actors can see everything that they're interacting with. You're not trying to act with a golf ball on a stick. You're
in front of a green screen. It feels much more like you're actually there.
You can see what you're supposed to be interacting with in real time. All of the lighting that's falling on you from the environment around you is correct to where you'll be. So you don't have that green screen effect where it's obvious that they're in a set and not where they actually are.
Right.
And it's very hard to correct for that post-production. This is all done in camera during the production.
Sure.
So the upshot of that is that game engines are making it possible for smaller TV productions to achieve the same or better, really, visual effects that big budget Hollywood movies have. So that's one application. And then also game engines have, video games have this application that's called serious games, which is where you use video game technology for serious applications. So one example is the military using, and Unreal 5 will be so useful for this because you can create a realistic copy of a location where a military operation is going to happen, and run the whole thing simulated ahead of time. And you create training systems. The US Army actually about 20 years ago now created a video game as a training system and then released it called America's Army released it to the public as a game. It's also useful for scientific applications. There's an online multiplayer game called Project Discovery, where citizen scientists play this game and do real science in the process. Real astronomical data is put in the game, and people are working on it in real time. Again, game engines make this possible. It has medical applications, like you were discussing last week, with imaging for operations and procedures, doing science on other planets that you can't go to, and things like that. There's all sorts of really exciting ways that these game engines make things possible.
That sounds very exciting. But what makes the technology for Unreal 5 different from other game engines?
So a virtual landscape is built out of what's called polygons, which basically triangles or other shapes sometimes, which, if you play a really old game, like a Nintendo 64 game, like the really early 3D games, the landscapes look very blocky. And that's because the system was only capable of rendering a certain number of polygons. So, if you have a little hill, in Super Mario 64, then
Super Mario for the Americans.
Yeah, it's built out of these triangles, and the landscape looks, and the closer you get to that, from far away it might look all right, and then when you get up close to it, it's clearly just a bunch of triangles stacked on top of each other.
Sure.
And as games got newer and newer, they were able to load more and more of these polygons at one time. So the landscapes got more detailed. The characters, your Nintendo 64 blocky face turned into a reasonably convincing human face. Yeah. But what Unreal 5 does, it uses a system, what is the name? If I can check my notes. I've lost it. Where is it? Nanite. It uses a system called Nanite, which basically means it only loads the polygons it needs to for where you are in the game. So if you're standing, back 50, 100 yards away from, the wall of the canyon, say, which is what the Unreal 5 demo that Epic has released, is this kind of Grand Canyon environment. Sure. So, which looks completely photorealistic. It's incredible. But so you're standing back here, and the rocks are over there in the distance. It's just loading the detail it needs for you to see it from that distance. It's not trying to load everything. So whereas in your old Nintendo game, it's loading the complete environment, and you're just walking up to it, and it's losing resolution as you get closer to it. In Unreal, what is over there is a intricately detailed model of a rock down to the dust grains on it, but it's not loading that when you're standing back here looking at it. It's called hierarchical polygon layers. So it will load the entire scene at a certain level of resolution, and as you move through the scene, it will load the parts that you're coming up to in more detail.
So just one layer at a time, basically, is what it's loading. Okay.
So you can go right up to that rock and look at it close up and see all the little details on it. But if you tried to load all of those rocks to that, the processing power would be completely insufficient. Yeah. So it uses that hierarchical stacking, and it basically kind of merges down that detail into the lower resolution layers for when you're further away. So that rock in the distance looks as detailed as it should. So it's got all that detail baked into the degree it needs to be at that distance. But then when you get up close to it,
then you see the
comes
detail.
So it's the same as if you're in the real world. The closer you get to something, the more that detail comes out.
Right.
So it's just that much more believable, and it's all. They have these sort of helicopter fly-throughs of this environment in their demo video, and it just as things get closer, they just stay crisp, and it's completely convincing. It's really phenomenal. So it's that photorealism that makes possible. So they can actually map real photo textures where they've gone out and photographed the location. So it's that. When I was a child and I played video games, I wondered, why don't they just use actual photos to make it look real? But now I understand. Now they can actually do that.
Well, that's really cool. And do you know who's leading the efforts, or who's done the development on this?
Yeah, so Unreal was the original Unreal 1 back in 1995, 98, I think was the development period, was developed by a man called Tim Sweeney. And he wrote 99% of the code for the original Unreal Engine back in the 90s. So, he was there, slaving away on his 90s PC or whatever he was using, writing the whole thing himself. He's now the CEO of Epic, and he's now worth $7 billion because
just reward for
that. 3 years of slaving away on a machine. Dealing with code is not easy, and the entertainment that's brought to people, and now the other things it's made possible as well. He's really generated a lot of value there. So as I was saying at the start, this is just the early release. So what they've released now is for game developers only to play around with what they can do with this engine, and I'm sure there'll be bugs and things that will pop up in that process that they'll fix as they go. But it's for game developers to get their teeth into it and see get a head start on games that they'll probably release with it in a year or two.
Sure.
But then at the beginning of 2022, according to their plans, they will release it
to anybody who wants to buy it,
to all industries. Is what they say on their website. So that will then go to the movie studios. And I mentioned The Mandalorian earlier. They used Unreal 4, the current version.
Earlier version.
Yeah. So if Disney's churning out these Star Wars and Marvel shows like nobody's business. So those will start looking incredible in a few years. I mean, they already look incredible, but they'll
even better.
Yeah. And the things they'll be able to do in those will just increase. But then also, all these military, scientific, medical applications will have this. It's really for the Star Trek fans out there. It's really like having a holodeck. It's this virtual environment that you can create any basically real environment within, not just visually, but with physics and everything. That's just you can simulate all sorts of things, and they do this. One interesting side actually is that when they were making the movie Interstellar. They built a model of a black hole. They wanted to get the most accurate black hole possible for that movie, and so they built this intricate digital model of how the physics would work, and in the process actually informed the real science of how black holes work. So a number of papers were published using the models that they built for the movie.
Really
so
cool.
These physics models are incredibly useful alongside the visual.
And the dedication that you have to put into a movie to actually discover things about physics in the process is quite
That's
notable.
happened in movies a few times. That's happened in archaeology and other fields where movies have tried to be super accurate about things. Happened with Titanic as well. So art has an impact on reality. In turn is kind of wonderful. But it's just another example. I mean, entertainment is valuable in of itself as entertainment. It gives our lives enjoyment and meaning, but then it also has all these sort of hidden benefits, second Bastiat style hidden results,
the unseen,
unseen effects that have all these extra implications, which is really quite exciting.
That is very exciting.
So I think that's everything. I think I've covered off all my notes there. So if you want to move on to our honourable mentions, I think you're going to talk to us about, he says, blanking.
Dengue fever.
Dengue fever, that's the first one.
So the first shout out that we wanted to give in a more brief manner for today is researchers who are using something that I find personally very, very interesting, which is when scientists use biology to our benefit. And so in this instance, it has to do with dengue fever, which is sometimes called break bone fever, because besides obviously giving you a high fever, it also causes excruciating pain in your bones and muscles. And this is vectored by mosquitoes. So this is similar to something we were talking about last week.
So vectored means spread, effectively.
Right. Yeah. So mosquitoes bite a person who has dengue, and the person may not know they have dengue yet because it has a fairly long incubation period. But they bite the person who has dengue. The dengue circulates in their body. They bite somebody else, and then they give that second person dengue. And so what these scientists have done instead is they infect the eggs of mosquitoes with a bacteria called Wolbachia bacteria. And that bacteria competes with the virus in the mosquito's body for where it would latch on and circulate. So the mosquito then is significantly less likely to spread it to the next person. And this is important, is the work that this has that's been done on this is happening in Indonesia, which is a country that is struggling with these outbreaks that happen of dengue fever, because it's not fatal, but people who need it, who get it, usually need hospitalization.
I'm assuming sort of the research has been done in the West, but it's being implemented in Indonesia.
So it's part of the World Mosquito Program. So it makes it sound like it's an interconnected network of scientists that are working together.
Because it's a country like Indonesia just generally doesn't have the infrastructure to handle these sorts of things. So I'm that kind of international effort
Yeah, it's an international effort for sure. And Dr. Katie Anders is the only name that I was able to find that was involved there, but they trialed it in an area of Indonesia called Yogyakarta. And what they did was they infected the eggs with the Wolbachia bacteria. They put them in water, not drinking water, but
mosquito breeding water.
Breeding water. And that's actually how mosquitoes normally breed. So I grew up in Wisconsin, and we were always told not to leave standing water as like rarely as possible, because that's where mosquitoes lay their eggs. Then we get more mosquitoes. In Wisconsin, we don't deal with dengue fever, but we do deal with West Nile virus, which is also vectored by mosquitoes. But it's the same concept. Wherever there are mosquitoes, they breed in water. And so scientists took advantage of knowing this and put the mosquitoes' eggs that they had infected with this bacteria in, ponds and things like that, where there's standing water where the eggs could hatch from. And in their trials, it was really, really successful. They managed to reduce cases by 77% and reduce hospitalizations for dengue by 86%. And the advantage of this technique over other techniques to reduce diseases spread by mosquitoes is most of the efforts just focus on killing mosquitoes or protecting people from mosquitoes. But there are always more mosquitoes. Doesn't matter how many you kill. And so that would take a really long, expensive, sustained effort to just be constantly killing mosquitoes, as opposed to, in this case, the Wolbachia infected mosquitoes can simply outcompete, and they do give a breeding advantage. I'm not sure exactly how it is, but they give a breeding advantage to these to the mosquitoes that have the bacteria, so they can actually outcompete the ones that do not. And
it still leaves you with the problem of mosquitoes flying around biting people, which is not.
Which great. I mean, it's an inconvenience. Yeah. But if they're not vectoring serious diseases, then it's much less of a serious problem. So very exciting potential there.
Yeah.
And then you're going to talk to us about flying taxis.
Flying taxis, indeed. Virgin, so Richard Branson's company Virgin is exploring a partnership with a company based in Bristol in England called Vertical Aerospace. And Vertical has are developing what is essentially an electric flying taxi. It's kind of a crossbreed between a helicopter and a plane. So it can take off and land vertically, like a helicopter. You can just
up and down,
land in a square or on a park or something, but then it can also land horizontally like an aircraft on an airport runway. And but this thing is electric, so it satisfies the environmental lobby and helps move aviation into a place where hopefully
it's zero emissions, isn't it?
Yeah. So hopefully it'll help the aviation industry stand up to all of the pressure it's under at the moment from the environmentalists to go greener. And I very much want that, because I think aviation is a wonderful thing for humanity, and the attacks it's facing at the moment I think are really destructive. So something that gives it an ace in its sleeve to, as I said last week with Boom, if it I think zero emission aircraft will do a lot of good in defending the aviation industry from all these attacks. But the other advantage of it being zero emission is it's almost silent.
Right, so it could work in residential areas.
Yeah, so as it happens, I don't know what happens, but for some reason a helicopter felt the need to land a couple hundred yards away from our house a few weeks ago.
And it was so loud.
Yeah, you're just again, this thing, it wasn't really nearby. You could see it in the distance kind of down, but there's just this sound was everywhere. And so that clearly isn't viable. Otherwise you could use helicopters for this kind of function now, but they're just deafening if you're anywhere near them. So Virgin's concept with this is that they will connect small towns to airports. So Virgin Atlantic is a transatlantic airline. So the idea is Cambridge to London was the corridor they were talking about, which this aircraft would pick up 4 passengers from Cambridge, fly them into Heathrow to connect with a Virgin flight to wherever they're going, or Delta flight, the same company, to wherever they're going. So you can through ticket and cut out all of that airport inconvenience by being on your flight from the town that you're leaving from.
So you essentially book a flight from Cambridge to New York or wherever.
Yeah, and you just have that one connection, which is an airside connection, ideally. So it just cuts out all of the hassle of getting to the airport, going through the airport, all that screwing around, that we have to do whenever we fly somewhere. So that's their concept. It should be noted, this is a flying taxi.
it's not a flying car.
It conjures up dreams of that kind of, Blade Runner flying car future. But the thing is that would require a whole new approach to air traffic control if you had thousands of flying vehicles in a city, all going different directions. What this is doing, it's an aircraft that can in future develop into something like that.
It's a step toward flying
cars. It's a step toward flying cars, but it's designed, the Virgin proposal is designed to operate within air traffic control as it exists currently. So it's flying at a higher altitude, it's mixing with other air traffic on this kind of, town to town route. Whereas if you have all these different privately owned things going in different directions, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And at lower altitudes as well, that's just something that we don't have the infrastructure for yet. But this can operate within the current air traffic control infrastructure in this country. And American Airlines is also in discussion with Vertical about using the same vehicle
in the US.
In a similar application.
Very cool.
So I think you're going to talk to us now about nuclear fusion.
Yeah, so there's a mixed public-private venture, if you will, to get a nuclear fusion power plant as a proof of concept in the UK by 2025. So the company involved is a Canadian company called General Fusion. And they want to prove that, so most nuclear power plants nowadays are nuclear fission. And nuclear fusion, there's concern that it's not economical. General Fusion thinks they have the answer, so they're working with the UK government to create a proof of concept plant that would be about 70% of the size of a full commercial plant, just to prove that it is viable.
And it's worth noting, I think, that although the UK somewhat unusually amongst most countries, energy providers are private and we have competition in that sector, the infrastructure is government owned. So there's not really a way to operate in the power space without engaging with governments.
And I think that's the case for most countries, is you'd have to deal with the government to do anything relating to infrastructure. But the exciting part is that there are some advantages of nuclear fusion over nuclear fission. So just to get into the difference a little bit, nuclear fission, which is what we have now, is when you take really heavy isotopes of elements like uranium and plutonium, and you bombard them with high-speed particles until they break apart and release energy.
So these are unstable isotopes.
These are really unstable.
Heavy elements,
Yes. So you've got like uranium-235 and 238 are two of the ones that are commonly used. And this works, and it doesn't produce any pollution, but you do have the radioactive waste. You've got half-lives of millions of years on elements like uranium, which is fine if you properly dispose of it, but that's an additional cost and an additional challenge for companies to overcome.
Just to be clear, the half-life of an element is the amount of time it takes for half of the radioactive material to decay. It then takes the same amount of time for half of what's left to decay.
Right.
So it really just goes on forever.
Right. So this material, you have radioactive waste that will exist for billions of years. And, again, you have to properly dispose of it. It's an additional challenge. It can be managed. But if you could not have that, then that would be a huge advantage. And that's what nuclear fusion promises. The way that works is the opposite. You start with a light
with the lightest element.
They usually use isotopes of hydrogen, and they fuse them together under high temperatures and pressures to create tritium, which breaks down in 12 years to helium. So it's not radioactive after it's broken down. The challenge is to create those high temperatures and pressures, because this is the same process that occurs in stars, which are obviously, super, super high temperatures, lots of pressure.
Well, yes, if you imagine the sun is 99% of the mass of the solar system, and the core has all of that mass weighing
in on it. So this is a challenge to recreate. Obviously, the way General Fusion does it is by using what's called magnetized target fusion. So they use plasma injectors to create, they look like smoke rings essentially of plasma that squish all of the particles together and create that high pressure, and then at the temperature, and you've got just briefly in that ring the conditions you need for fusion, and they just continuously produce these smoke rings that then dissipate relatively quickly. So if this does prove economical, then that could be a revolution in how we produce power and create a whole pollution-free system.
It's been a long process. There's a nuclear fusion research centre at Culham near Oxford, and they've been engaged for 20, 30 years, I think since the late 60s actually, in
trying to make this work.
And since the 90s, they've had a working reactor. It's just that it costs more energy to create those circumstances than you get out in power. So it's trying to flip that around.
Right. If general fusion could successfully flip that around, this would be the culmination of decades of research, which would be really, really cool.
Yes.
And then you were going to finish this off, I think, by talking about a COVID-19 antibody treatment.
Yes. So speaking of Oxford, where many great things come from, this is a new COVID-19 treatment. This isn't a preventative thing. This is a treatment that's given to people who are already infected with COVID-19, which has come out of Nuffield College in Oxford, or at the University of Oxford. And this treatment is based on using artificial antibodies. So when you're infected with a virus like SARS-CoV-19, your body generates natural antibodies to the invasive, what's entered your system. And the way that a lot of the COVID-19 vaccines work, and flu vaccines and all the other vaccines we take for viruses, is they use a modified version of that virus that enters your system less threateningly, but triggers the immune response. So it makes your body create the antibodies for that virus,
right?
And then you get your 6 to 9 month whatever period of being
immune,
essentially immune to that virus. What this treatment is all about is people who've already got the virus, and this virus, the vast majority of people it infects don't really exhibit symptoms at all or severe ones.
Right.
But those who do, who end up hospitalized with it or at risk of death from it, this injects 2 artificial antibodies instead. So it's not using the body's natural process, it's injecting 2 different artificial ones. And the point of injecting 2 is that the virus will try to adapt to the antibodies that are binding to it. So the virion, I said it right this time.
Yes, very good.
The virion, which is the individual virus particle, that spiky thing that you always see in the graphics on news articles, the antibody binds to that and neutralizes it. So, but they very quickly start to adapt to these things and produce, and this is why vaccinations wear off as the virus mutates.
That's why we need a flu shot every year.
But so this process is using 2 different antibodies at the same time. So the virus is like, oh, I'm dealing with this, oh, there's another one, and it can't deal with both of them at the same time. So one or both of them significantly reduces the impact that the virus is having on the patient,
which then reduce the symptoms that the patient is experiencing.
And saves lives ideally. So I think this is a really crucial thing in dealing with COVID-19, and it really is. So there's the speed with which the vaccines have been developed is impressive, and their efficacy is really impressive, and that's a testament to all of the different companies who've produced those.
Definitely.
Whether or not they've been approved by the FDA, they're all very impressive.
Yeah.
And but I think this kind of treatment for the already infected is as important, if not more, because viruses exist in the world. What matters is it doesn't matter if you catch them. We catch colds all the time. What matters is what damage they do if you catch them. And if regardless of your views on the proper way to deal with something like COVID-19, the important thing isn't how many people catch the virus. And we keep talking about case rates with this pandemic. It really isn't terribly important. What's important is how many people get ill and die from it. And so if the people who catch it who aren't able to naturally defend against it have treatments that can help them and prevent them from dying and make them better again, the severity of this virus just decreases dramatically. And hopefully treatments like this, and there have been a number of right from the start of the pandemic, they very quickly started figuring out ways to treat it that reduced its severity for those who had already caught it, and were experiencing severe symptoms from it. So the more of those you have, the more this virus can take its sort of rightful place of just being another of the things we deal with on a regular basis, and not be this global crisis that we seem to currently be treating it as. So I think this is a really positive step
forward,
towards
definitely.
this just being another manageable contagion that we deal with on an annual basis.
Absolutely. So that's all we had for today?
I think that's all we had for today.
So just to recap really quickly, I started out today by talking about the I've completely blanked. It's gone out of my head.
Cancer treatment.
Cancer treatment test. The test for to detect cancer off a blood test, the Galleri test. And then
I talked about Unreal 5 game engine.
And then in our honorable mentions, I talked about using a bacteria in mosquitoes to fight dengue fever.
I talked about Virgin and Vertical Aerospace's flying taxi concept.
And then I talked about the nuclear fusion plant that's set to open in 2025.
And I finished up with the COVID-19 treatment that we were just talking about.
So thank you so much for joining us on Innovation Celebration.
And look forward to joining you next time.
Mm-hmm.